The first shout wasn't a command. It was a warning. A British aide burst through the tent flap, his face drained of all color, breath slicing the cold Crimean air. "Sir, Russian guns moving, all of them." Lord Raglan froze mid-sentence. Maps fluttered as the wind knifed through the opening. Outside, thunder rolled, not from the sky, but from siege batteries waking like monsters. Every head snapped up. Something was shifting on the ridges, something vast. This was the morning the British officers realized the battlefield was slipping out of their hands. Time? Sunrise, October 25th, 1854. Place? The heights above Balaclava, Crimea. Players? British command staff scrambling inside Raglan's headquarters tent. What's about to explode? A suicidal cavalry order born from panic, miscommunication, and the iron will of men who would rather die than hesitate. A second officer stumbled in, boots caked with mud from a desperate ride. "Sir, enemy infantry advancing on the Causeway Heights. Our redoubts are falling one by one." Raglan's jaw tightened. The reports were coming too fast, too fragmented. Russian columns, thousands of them, were moving in the half-light, pushing toward the British supply line. If those heights fell completely, the entire army could be cut off from the sea. He stepped outside. What he saw hit him like a fist. Beyond the mist, Russian artillery teams were dragging their guns into new, lethal positions on the far ridge. They weren't defending. They were preparing to strike again. The valley in between, long, straight, empty, looked less like a battlefield and more like a killing ground waiting for victims. Raglan muttered to himself, "They mean to take the whole valley." Another blast tore across the hills. Smoke boiled upward. Horses screamed. And from the southern redoubts, tiny specks, British Marines, were running downhill under a hail of fire. The line was collapsing. Raglan snapped, "Where is the cavalry?" The staff scattered to find the answer. Cliffhanger beat. Russian shells began falling closer. One slammed into the hillside just yards away, exploding in a fountain of earth. Officers threw themselves flat. Raglan didn't move. He watched the valley as if staring down the throat of fate. Behind him, General Airey, his chief of staff, whispered, "If the Russians carry off those guns, they'll turn them on the port." Raglan didn't answer. He was thinking fast, desperately, the way a commander does when the board is full of threats and the next wrong move will cost thousands of lives. Down in the valley, the Light Brigade waited. Row after row of horsemen, half shrouded in mist. They could see none of this. Hear none of the frantic calculations at headquarters. They only knew the morning had gone very, very wrong. Another redoubt fell. Another shell screamed low overhead. Airey finally said the words that would ignite catastrophe. "Something must be done, sir." Raglan turned sharply. "Then order it." There was no pause, no debate, no clarity. Just a flurry of pens, scribbling under pressure as the Russians pushed harder. A single written order would soon be placed into the hands of a young cavalry officer. A single vague line, a single terrible misunderstanding, and it would send hundreds of British horsemen charging straight into the jaws of Russian artillery. Captain Louis Nolan rode like a man chasing the earth as it tried to spin away from him. He tore across the hillside toward the Light Brigade. Raglan's written order clenched in his glove, rage and urgency burning under his uniform. Shell bursts kicked dirt at his horse's hooves, but he didn't slow. Every second he lost meant another Russian gun team tightening its grip on the valley. Behind him, Raglan's staff watched helplessly. The order was gone. The fate of hundreds now rested on a message that had been scribbled in haste, spoken in tension, and carried by the one man in the army who could deliver it with either clarity or catastrophic misunderstanding. Down in the valley, Lord Cardigan sat mounted at the head of the Light Brigade, bored, irritated, and fully convinced the infantry's chaos didn't concern him. His polished boots gleamed, His posture was immaculate. He looked like a portrait waiting for a frame. Then Nolan came thundering in. Cardigan's expression soured the instant he recognized him. The two men despised each other. Fiery Nolan and cold, aristocratic Cardigan. Oil and flame trapped in the same command structure. Nolan thrust out the message. Orders from Lord Raglan. Cardigan snatched it open. His eyes flicked across the words. Lord Raglan wishes the cavalry to advance rapidly to the front and try to prevent the enemy carrying away the guns. Cardigan blinked, then scowled. Which guns? From the valley floor, there was only one line of guns visible. The massive Russian battery at the far end, nearly a mile straight ahead, bristling with cannons like a steel-toothed beast. It made no sense. No commander, no rational one, would order cavalry to charge that. Cardigan looked up. He cannot mean those guns. Nolan didn't hesitate. He does. A spark of fury flashed between them. Cardigan's voice sharpened to a blade. The order is absurd. Nolan leaned closer, eyes blazing. Those are the Commander-in-Chief's orders. You are to obey. A shell shrieked overhead. Cardigan's horse flinched. The men around them stiffened. Even the wind seemed to go silent for a heartbeat. Cardigan folded the message with a slow, deliberate contempt. Very well. He turned in the saddle. Light Brigade, form line. Thousands of hooves shifted. Breastplates creaked. The long blue line of British cavalry straightened like a drawn sword. Nolan's breath caught. He realized, in a flash of horror, that Cardigan had taken the order literally. That he would lead the brigade straight down the valley, directly into the guns. Nolan opened his mouth to correct him, to stop the madness, to shout the truth back toward Raglan's distant vantage point. But Cardigan's voice exploded over the valley. Advance! The first troopers kicked forward. Nolan's pulse spiked. My God. But Cardigan didn't look back. He was already riding. The brigade surged with him, 600 strong, hooves pounding like thunder, rolling straight toward the storm. Nolan spurred ahead, desperate to redirect them before the line fully committed. He gestured wildly to the left, toward the guns Raglan had actually meant, the captured redoubts on the heights. A Russian shell screamed down. It hit close, too close. A shockwave slammed into Nolan. His gesture froze halfway through the air. He jerked in the saddle, then he fell. The man who had carried the order. The man who had understood the truth. The only man who could still stop the charge was the first to die. Only the brigade saw it. Only they felt the horror of it. And still the valley opened before them, waiting. Nolan's body hadn't yet hit the ground when the brigade felt the shift. A ripple of shock. A tightening in the gut. A question that none of them dared voice aloud. If Nolan is dead, then who truly knows where we're going? But Cardigan didn't slow. He didn't turn. He didn't acknowledge the corpse of the man who had tried to warn him. He simply rode on, rigid as iron, his eyes locked on the distant Russian guns, like he was daring them to break first. Behind him, 600 riders followed because discipline demanded it, because pride demanded it, because the order, however insane, was still an order. And the Light Brigade did not question commands, they executed them. The valley closed around them like a corridor built entirely of fire. On the ridges to their left and right, Russian artillery batteries swung their muzzles inward. Gunners shouted. Ramrods slammed. Fuses sparked. The first crossfire erupted like a trap snapping shut. Shells burst above the brigade, showering them with jagged shrapnel. Horses screamed. Men ducked low against their saddles, instinctively folding into the storm. The thunder of hooves mixed with the concussions of explosions until it became impossible to tell which sound belonged to the living and which to the dead. Trooper Henry Gregory felt the wind of a cannonball as it ripped past his head. Another tore through the rider 2 horses down, blowing him out of the saddle in a spray of blood and cloth. Gregory didn't blink. He couldn't. His body was operating on something beyond fear now, something forged in discipline and blind momentum. The brigade kept moving, faster. Russian officers on the heights froze at the sight. They had expected hesitation. They had expected panic. They had not expected the British cavalry to accelerate directly into the kill zone. A gun captain spat a curse. "They're coming straight on. Load faster." The ridges lit up again. A shell detonated beneath the right flank. Horses toppled like dominoes. Riders flew. One man hit the ground rolling, legs twisted, screaming for his mother. The line closed over him without slowing. Cardigan didn't look, couldn't look. His jaw was locked, teeth clenched so hard, a trickle of blood seeped from the corner of his mouth. He could feel the crossfire tightening, feel the air vibrating with incoming rounds, but he refused to bend. His men were watching him. His pride demanded perfection even here, especially here. Captain Morris shouted over the roar, "Steady, lads, keep your dressing." But every few seconds, another rider fell. Another horse collapsed. Gaps opened, then closed, then tore open again. The once straight line was becoming ragged, uneven, bleeding strength with every yard. And still the Russian guns grew larger in front of them. A trooper toward the rear vomited from terror, but continued riding. Another whispered the Lord's Prayer until a shell fragment cut him off mid-syllable. One sergeant clutched his reins so tightly his knuckles burst through the skin. The valley floor trembled beneath their charge. Halfway down the valley now. No cover, no retreat, no understanding of how this could possibly end, except in annihilation. Yet something impossible was happening. The closer they rode, the more the Russians hesitated. No one charges artillery head-on. No one. It was madness, pure and total, and the Russians weren't sure if they were witnessing bravery or insanity or the beginning of some British trick. A lieutenant on the Russian side shouted, "Hold fire until they're in the mouth of the guns. Break them at the end." Cardigan didn't hear him, but he could feel it. The tightening, the narrowing, the sense that every step forward was sealing their fate. A single thought burned through him. We've gone too far to stop now. The Light Brigade thundered onward, straight into the jaws of death. The last stretch of the valley felt unreal. Too bright, too loud, too close. The Russian battery at the far end loomed like a wall of iron mouths, every cannon locked on the approaching line. The smoke drifting from their barrels hung heavy and low, a curtain of doom waiting to swallow the incoming horsemen. Cardigan could now see individual gunners, faces, movements. The glint of bayonets stacked in rows behind the battery. What he didn't see, what he refused to see, was the trail of bodies behind him. Riders he had known for years, horses that had carried the brigade through drills, parades, campaigns, all of them lying broken on the valley floor. The crossfire intensified. A direct hit tore through the front ranks. Men vanished, not fell, vanished. The smell of burned flesh and powder choked the air. Trooper Pennington felt his horse stumble. He looked down. Blood poured over the saddle from a wound he didn't remember receiving. The world spun sideways. Horse and rider crashed together. The line surged past him as he lay gasping on the earth, watching hooves blur by. Still, the charge did not break. A Russian colonel at the gun line yelled for concentrated fire. "Aim for the center, bring them down, in one blow." Crews yanked their guns downward, fuses hissing, hands shaking with either fear or desperate focus. A single volley from this distance could erase the brigade entirely. Captain Morris saw it coming. "Brace!" he bellowed. The Russians fired. The earth jumped. A white-hot wall of smoke erupted. The volley hit the Light Brigade like a hammer, smashing into glass. Horses collapsed in heaps. Riders were flung forward like rag dolls. Saddles flipped. Steel clattered against steel. Limbs tore. The entire center of the line almost ceased to exist. Just a cloud of dust and screams. Cardigan's horse reared, hit hard by the blast wave. He clung to the reins with both hands, teeth rattling, vision fragmenting. For a moment he thought the world had gone silent. Then the ringing in his ears cleared, and the thunder returned tenfold. They should have turned back. They should have broken. Any normal cavalry force would have dissolved under that blow. But what rose from the smoke was not normal. A narrow spear point of riders, what remained of the vanguard, pushed through the devastation. 20 men? 30? It didn't matter. They charged straight at the battery, faces smeared with soot and blood, eyes wild with the clarity that comes when death feels certain and distant at the same time. Russian officers shouted in disbelief. "They're still coming!" Cardigan lowered his saber. No flourish, no command, just grim inevitability. The guns loomed only yards away now. Sergeant Henry Berryman urged his horse faster, yelling at the top of his lungs, not from courage, but to drown out the terror. Cannon crews scrambled to reload before the cavalry reached them. Some failed. Others grabbed ramrods as improvised weapons. The final yards stretched like eternity. Cardigan's horse leapt the last patch of earth, and then impact. The light brigade smashed into the Russian battery in an explosion of steel, shouts, panic, and point-blank violence. This was the breaking point. The moment the world seemed to stop breathing. The moment the disaster became irreversible. The British had reached the guns, and the Russians never expected them to. If you're pulled into this story, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. The crash of bodies and steel tore the morning open. British riders vaulted straight over cannon barrels, sabers flashing, horses slamming into gun crews with bone-breaking force. Russian artillerymen scattered, some grabbing bayonets, others trying to fire pistols in shaking hands. The battery dissolved into chaos, shouting, smoke, blood, and the frantic scramble to survive the impossible sight of British cavalry inside their gun line. Sergeant Berryman stabbed downward at a gunner reloading his piece. The man fell backward over the cannon wheel, screaming. Another lunged at Berryman with a ramrod, striking his arm, but the sergeant slashed blindly in return. He didn't think. He didn't breathe. He simply fought because stopping meant dying. Cardigan plunged deeper into the battery, narrowly dodging a bayonet thrust. He shouted for the men to rally, to hold formation, commands lost in the inferno of close combat. It wasn't a charge anymore. It was a street fight among cannons, every inch contested with fury. For a brief, impossible moment, the Light Brigade held the guns. But then the valley vomited more Russians into the fray. Infantry poured in from behind the battery. Hundreds of riflemen. Thousands. Muskets leveled. The British were now surrounded. Guns behind them, rifles in front, artillery still firing from the ridges on both sides. A perfect killing circle. Captain Morris yelled, "Fall back! Fall back!" But half the brigade was already dead or dying, and the rest fought like men trapped inside collapsing walls. Cardigan realized the truth in an instant. Their grip on the battery couldn't hold. He wheeled his horse and bolted back through the smoke, narrowly avoiding the bayonet thrust of a Russian infantryman. Some thought he fled. Others thought he regrouped. It didn't matter. The line had shattered. The Russians closed in. Trooper William Ellis tried to retreat, swinging his horse around, but rifle fire tore him off the saddle before he made 5 yards. Another rider was pulled down by 3 gunners at once. Horses slipped in pools of blood. Sabers shattered against rifle stocks. The surviving men looked for escape routes that no longer existed. A cluster of British troopers managed to break out toward the flank. They rode bent low over their horses' necks, dodging musket volleys and cannon blasts. Their only mission now, live long enough to leave the valley. Behind them, the fight dissolved completely. A wounded trumpeter crawled across the dirt, leaving a red trail behind him, whispering a broken command to retreat, even though no one could hear it. The Russian infantry surged forward. The Light Brigade collapsed backward. Those who could still ride galloped desperately through smoke and gunfire, pushing past bodies, past shattered tack, past friends who would never rise again. Each hoofbeat felt like a countdown. The ridges erupted once more, Russian guns firing into the backs of the fleeing cavalry. Yet somehow, impossibly, riders emerged from the haze. A dozen, then more. Bloodied, burned, limping, half deaf, half blind, but alive. They reached the far end of the valley, where friendly lines waited in stunned silence. When the survivors appeared, the British infantry gasped. Some lowered their rifles, some dropped to their knees. They had watched the entire charge unfold. They expected no one to return. Cardigan rode past them, face pale, uniform torn, refusing to admit what everyone already knew. The Light Brigade was gone. What crawled back were only fragments. The guns were never captured. The order was never clarified. The valley remained littered with wreckage and silence. The price had been paid in full. From this moment on, nothing could ever return to normal. If you want more stories that shake history, comment and subscribe.